Think about how you look at your reflection. Most of the time, you don't. It's just this silent agreement your brain makes with the glass. You catch your face in a dark window or a bathroom mirror, and your mind accepts it without a second thought. You move, it walks, everything lines up. You never stop to wonder if that thing staring back at you is getting it right. That only changes when the rhythm slips. It's never something obvious. There's no sudden cinematic scare, just a tiny mistake in the glass. A delay so small your brain almost misses it. Your first reaction isn't terror, it's just pure denial. You blame the lighting, a tired mind, or a quick trick of the eyes. You look away, fully expecting everything to fix itself. But the doubt is already there. When you look back, trying to prove you're still connected to the person in front of you, the reflection usually settles. You breathe. The moment passes. But when it doesn't, when the features are yours, but the expression looks completely vacant, the entire atmosphere shifts. The face is familiar, sure, but something about it feels separate from you. It's the physical version of what Carl Jung meant when he described making the darkness conscious. He wasn't talking about literal ghosts or monsters. He was talking about the terrifying realization that parts of ourselves cannot exist without our permission, hidden in plain sight until something forces us to look. That darkness was always there, quietly mimicking our movements. And once you finally spot it, you can't go back to pretending you didn't. You don't realize how much of your identity depends on quiet recognition until it fails. The way you hold your shoulders, the small habits you never think about. Your mind treats all of it as proof that you are you. The moment that certainty disappears, something much deeper takes its place. The possibility that something completely familiar can still be completely wrong. When that certainty breaks, your body panics before your thoughts can even catch up. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, constantly comparing what it sees to what it expects. When that pattern doesn't fit, something inside you snaps. That exact tension is where the horror lives, and your mind is forced to accept two impossible ideas at once. A monster is easy to understand. A stranger is easy to dismiss. A double exists in the collision between them, forcing your mind to accept two impossible ideas at once. That this is me, and this is not me. What makes it worse is that imitation is almost perfect. Things staring back at you was grotesque or distorted, your brain would know exactly what to do with it. The real discomfort comes from how close it is to succeeding. A doppelganger doesn't just copy your face, it moves in the mental space your brain reserves exclusively for you. You look away again, you tell yourself it's just fatigue or a lapse in attention, but some part of you keeps checking, hoping the reflection will finally behave the way it's supposed to. It never quite does. It stays trapped in that uncanny space, familiar enough to recognize it instantly, but wrong enough to make your stomach tighten. The real dread doesn't arrive with the delay itself, it comes in the silence afterward. When you realize you aren't watching your reflection anymore, you're waiting to see what it does next. A photograph or a mannequin can look like you, but a double carries something much heavier beneath the surface. It doesn't just copy your face, it copies your habits, your mannerisms, the small unconscious movements that make you recognizable. It feels like Jung's idea of the shadow made physical. Parts of yourself you suppressed or ignored, suddenly walking around with pieces of you that never were supposed to leave your own head. People have been trying to process this specific vulnerability for centuries. In Irish folklore, a double was called a fetch, a manifestation that appeared right before a person's death. It wasn't treated as a harmless trick of the light. Other historical accounts carry the same heavy inevitability. Even the word doppelganger hints at this autonomy. In German, it translates roughly to double walker. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe wrote about riding down a road and passing a version of himself traveling in the opposite direction, wearing a gray suit that he did not own. Years later, Goethe found himself traveling that exact same road, wearing the very clothing he had seen on his double. What disturbed him wasn't the sight of a monster, but the realization that a piece of his identity existed outside its proper place and time. In Journey to the West, the Monkey King Sun Wukong battles a clone that is his exact equal. The nightmare of the story isn't the physical fight, it's that no one, not even his closest companions, can tell which one is genuine. The question isn't who wins the battle, but whether there's any meaningful difference between them at all. This is the common thread across almost every culture's stories. The double rarely appears as random coincidence. It shows up when the self begins to fracture. Most of us carry parts of ourselves that never reach the surface, impulses, resentments, and fears that don't fit the version of ourselves we show the world. We learn to manage them, ignore them, and eventually convince ourselves that they don't exist. A doppelganger challenges that lie. It represents the possibility that things you buried never actually disappeared. It gives those hidden pieces a face, and that is why the encounter feels so personal. You aren't terrified because you're looking at a stranger. You're terrified because you are looking at something that belongs to you, but completely stands outside your control. We all perform different versions of ourselves. We are one person at work, another with friends, and another when we are completely alone. None of these identities are false, but they aren't complete either. They are edited versions of a much larger whole. The double strips away that editing. It ignores the boundaries you build around your personality and forces you to confront what remains underneath. It doesn't just resemble you, it behaves exactly like you. It moves through the world with the exact same instincts, sharing your history and your habits. Eventually, the distinction between you and it begins to blur, and that is where the real crisis begins. The damage doesn't just stop in the present either, it reaches backward into your past. Most of us trust our memories because we assume they belong to a conscious self. I did this, I felt that. Those experiences are mine. A doppelganger undermines that certainty. At first, the doubt is small, a conversation you don't remember clearly, a decision that feels strangely distant. It's the sort of thing anyone can dismiss as fatigue, but once the double enters the picture, every gap in your timeline becomes suspicious. You start to revisit old memories, looking for a reassurance, but you find uncertainty instead. Was that milestone really yours? Did you actually live in that moment? Or did the other version do it? The more closely you examine the past, the less solid it feels. Memory stops acting like evidence and starts acting like a liability. Once you lose confidence in your own memories, you lose confidence in the person those memories are supposed to build. Up until this point, there was still room for a rational explanation. As long as the experience remained confined to your own head, you can blame a trick of the light or a lapse in concentration. That excuse disappears the moment the double becomes physical. It isn't a thought anymore. It isn't a misinterpretation. It is standing right there, breathing the same air, moving through the same space, and existing entirely independent of you. The worst part is how familiar it feels. When it walks, you recognize the specific rhythm of its movements. When it pauses, you recognize the hesitation. Every gesture feels uncomfortably close, not because you've seen it somewhere else, but because you lived it. At this stage, you stop trying to solve the mystery. The double is no longer a puzzle to be figured out. It is a presence. A reflection can be ignored, and a photograph can be put away, but something that occupies the same room as you demands a response. It doesn't need to convince you that it is real. Its existence is proof enough. That realization creates a different kind of fear. You stop focusing on what the double might do and start wondering what its behavior says about your own mind. If it moves, thinks, and acts like you, the line separating its intentions from your own disappears. The threat is no longer outside of you. And once that idea takes hold, you don't even need the double standing in front of you anymore. You carry it with you. Long after the physical encounter ends, the awareness remains lodged in the back of your mind. You stop looking for it, but you never stop expecting it. You catch yourself staring at reflections a little too long, at a window at night, a dark screen, a mirror you pass in the hall. Nothing happens, but the emptiness almost makes it worse. The fear doesn't leave, it waits. Ordinary spaces lose their neutrality. The hallway you walk through 1,000 times feels different, not because the wooden walls have changed, but because your attention has sharpened. You are no longer simply existing in the world. You're auditing it, watching from the moment where reality stops making sense. The absence of the double does not bring relief, it creates tension. The double doesn't need to chase you, it only needs to make you doubt that you were ever truly alone. Eventually the erosion moves inward. There is no dramatic collapse, just a small moments where you catch yourself reacting before you think. A choice feels strangely distant the second after you make it. A familiar action feels like something you watched instead of something you did. These are tiny breaks in the story you tell yourself about who you are. You start feeling disconnected from your own hands, like an external observer watching an avatar execute your actions from a distance. You no longer trust your connection between your intentions and the physical shell carrying them out. You begin questioning everything you once accepted without a thought, your reactions, your memories, your choices. The double does not destroy you by replacing you. It destroys you by making you wonder whether there was a clear difference between you and the thing you feared. You make a decision and you pause, wondering if the thought was genuinely yours, or if you are simply following a pattern that was already laid down for you. You don't exactly lose control. Something worse happens. Control stops feeling like something you own. Fear is no longer that you're being hunted, it is a realization that the boundary between yourself and the rest of the world was an illusion. When you move through your day with part of your attention always fixed on the edges of your vision, you realize that there is no clean escape. You can't run from a double because it was never truly separate from you. It wasn't an interruption to your life, it was a crack that was always there, waiting for the right moment to show itself. This is where the concept becomes a weapon in video games. The game already completely blurs the line between the observer and the participant. You aren't just watching a character move through a nightmare, you are the one pressing the buttons. You choose where they turn, you choose when they run. The character moves because you move. When a game starts mirroring your actual behavior, it stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like an interrogation. You make a choice, you hesitate, or you repeat a specific movement pattern without even realizing it, and the game reflects that exact behavior right back at you. It doesn't matter that the double is just made of code. Your brain recognizes the input. The distance between the screen and the hands holding the controller begins to disappear. You can't stay detached because your own choices are driving the machine. You aren't just witnessing the loop, you are generating it. That is where the horror shifts. The instability is no longer confined to what's on the screen. It exists in the physical space between you and the hardware. Your decisions, your panic, and your expectations become part of the system itself. The double ceases to be just a character or a creature. It becomes a reflection created by the interaction. Looking back, the doppelganger has never been about just one static nightmare. It morphs depending on the medium it inhabits, but its most lethal iterations target your behavior. In an interactive space, the double ceases to be a passive visual scare. It transforms into an active participant that monitors your choices, studies your execution, and turns your own mechanical habits into a weapon. The horror is no longer that a monster is mimicking your shape, but that an external system has mapped your agency. The doppelganger isn't frightening because it introduces an alien threat from the dark. It's terrifying because it asks whether the small, unconscious choices that make you who you are were truly never yours in the first place. Identity feels like something permanent, but it's far more fragile than we admit. It can be calculated, simulated, and reflected back at us. We stop asking what the double is. The real question becomes, what happens when the thing staring back at us knows you better than you know yourself? Case Study 1. Pyramid Head, Silent Hill 2. Pyramid Head becomes harder to understand the more you try to look at him as just a standard monster. He isn't frightening because he is massive, powerful, or violent. He is frightening because he belongs explicitly to James Sunderland. The first time James sees him behind the rusted bars of the Woodside apartments, he has no idea what he is looking at. To James, the figure is just another nightmare waiting in the fog, something dangerous to be avoided or killed. That reaction makes perfect sense for a man trapped in an unreality. He doesn't know the truth of his situation yet, so all he can do is react defensively. Pyramid Head never behaves like a standard antagonist. Most monsters in horror games exist to hunt. They chase you, they attack, and you either kill them or you die. Pyramid Head watches. He waits. He appears again and again, not necessarily to block James's path, but to ensure he keeps moving forward. There's an intimacy to these encounters. It never feels like James accidentally stumbled into a predator's territory. It feels like it's an appointment. The fear of the double comes from watching something that should only exist inside your own mind manifest into the physical world. Throughout the game, James is searching for his deceased wife, Mary, while actively running from the parts of himself he cannot bear to acknowledge. His guilt, his sexual frustration, and his profound denial are always present, buried beneath his conscious thoughts. Pyramid Head is those buried impulses given weight. If an enemy is completely separate from you, you can fight it, you can blame it, dehumanize it. But James spends the majority of the story trying to maintain a physical distance from Pyramid Head because closing that gap means closing the distance within his own crimes. The creature is a reflection James refuses to look at, returning because James keeps running from the exact same revelation. The problem is not that James cannot escape the executioner. The problem is that there is nowhere to run where the executioner doesn't already live. As the story unfolds, the illusion of the outside monster breaks down entirely. Pyramid Head stops feeling like a local legend stalking a tourist and starts feeling like a localized gravity well, pulling James toward the truth. The real horror isn't that James is being hunted by a creature in a metal helmet. It is that the creature is the only part of James that is currently telling the truth. Pyramid Head does not represent an external boss to defeat. He represents a self-inflicted punishment that James cannot escape until he finally admits why he deserves it. Case Study 2. Dark Link, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Dark Link has appeared in various forms throughout the Legend of Zelda series, alternating between a literal shadow and a symbolic manifestation of Link's burden. But his appearance in the Water Temple of Ocarina of Time is where the Doppelganger moves beyond a visual gimmick and becomes a profound mechanical nightmare. The game prepares you for this confrontation long before you even step foot in the room. If you're like me, you probably spent hours losing your mind at the water temple, just trying to protract the geometry. It's an architectural exercise in complete disorientation. The water level rises and falls, constantly altering the layout of the space. You equipped and unequipped iron boots constantly. Zelda's lullaby repeats over and over in your head. Rooms that felt familiar suddenly lock you out. Paths that were blocked open up, forcing you to backtrack through everywhere you've already been. The temple trains you to just trust your surroundings, creating a world that constantly reflects, distorts, and reconfigures itself. When you finally step into that reflective room at the heart of the dungeon, Darkling does not act like an intruder invading your journey. He feels like the room's natural output. The encounter is stripped of any familiarity. There is no introductory cutscene, no grand dialogue. There is only a silent figure standing by a solitary tree, waiting. That silence forces your focus entirely onto the reality of what you're seeing. Darkling does not fight with an alien skill set. He wields the same sword, encounters with the exact same timing. He is dangerous precisely because he is familiar. At first, you attempt to treat the encounter like any standard trial, watch the movements, learn the loop, and find the opening. But the machine breaks down because Darkling doesn't need to learn how you fight. He already knows. When you try a basic sword strike, he counters it instantly, literally jumping on top of your blade and mirroring your inputs with flawless precision. You stop fighting an opponent and start fighting with the momentum of your own buttons. This is where the doppelganger concept shifts from a visual illusion to an existential threat. The traditional double is not terrifying because it shares your face. The true horror is the possibility that something else could exist as you. Darklink isn't wearing Link's identity as a disguise. He's an entity generated from the same physical foundation as the original. The terrifying distinction between them is entirely invisible. Link's journey is forged through his journey, his memories, his losses, and the heavy choices that gave his movements meaning. Darkling possesses the physical compatibility without any of the context. By giving the water's reflection a physical body, the game forces a devastating question. If another version of you can stand there with the exact same skills, weapons, and reflexes, what actually makes you the original? The answer cannot be seen on the screen. It can only exist in the unwritten history of the person holding the controller. Darklink remains one of the most effective doppelgangers in gaming because he doesn't threaten to destroy you with superior force. He threatens to render you completely redundant. As Navi says, you must conquer yourself. Case Study 3, SAX, Metroid Fusion. The SAX is a completely different kind of doppelganger. Pyramid Head is internal guilt made impossible to ignore. Darklink is a mechanical mirror that challenges your claim to uniqueness. The SAX takes the archetype in a more predatory direction. It is not a reflection, it is a replacement. When Samus first encounters the SAX, the immediate horror is a visual double wearing her power suit. It has her exact armor, her weapons, her abilities. It's Samus at the peak of her power. Everything that once made you feel invisible in previous games is suddenly turned against you, but the visual similarity is only the surface layer. The unsettling part is how it naturally carries that identity. A typical horror game enemy requires you to learn its patterns, learn its blind spots, and adapt. The SAX creates the inverse nightmare. It already understands you. It uses the exact ice beams, power bombs, and screw attacks that you normally rely for safety. The tools that historically made you feel powerful are suddenly weaponized against you. It is your own legacy turned into a hunting protocol. The oldest doppelganger legends weren't feared simply because of a chance encounter with a look-alike. They were feared because the double could successfully remove your place in the world, leaving everyone around you unable to tell the difference. Metroid Fusion simulates this theft because the player is already attached to Samus' capabilities. You aren't watching an NPC get replaced, you are patrolling the victim of theft. This dynamic splits the timeline of the horror, separating the SAX from Dark Link. Dark Link exists purely in the present, reacting directly to your button inputs. The SAX exists one step ahead of you. It is already in the BSL station before you arrive, leaving ruptured doors, carnage, and mystery in its wake. Often you don't see it, you just hear the echoing, rhythmic thud of its footsteps, praying it doesn't notice you. You are not facing a mirror, you are tracking a ghost that happens to wear your name. The copy has broken away from the original entirely. It no longer needs you to validate its existence. The structure of Metroid Fusion reinforces this disparity through your progression mechanics. The game begins with Samus physically degraded, her armor surgically removed, her body altered, and her ability stripped down to zero. The player is forced into a desperate situation with a low chance of survival. The SAX is the structural opposite. It represents the idealized version of who you used to be, while you desperately are rebuilding. You aren't just trying to kill a monster, you're trying to catch up with a superior version of yourself that has already moved past you. The only piece of the armor that the X-Parasite could not copy is the invisible context behind it, the human memory, the morality, and the specific choices that made those weapons meaningful in the first place. But the SAX proves that external components of identity can be perfectly simulated. Your silhouette, your skills, and your actions can all exist and function perfectly well without your permission. By the end of the game, the SAX ceases to look like an intruder stalking a space station. It becomes an existential threat. It suggests that if a counterfeit can perform your identity well enough to deceive reality itself, the original becomes entirely obsolete. So what do we actually do with all this? When you look at all three of these games side by side, you realize that the Doppelganger isn't just a recurring horror trope appearing in different forms. It represents successive stages of what happens when a human identity fractures and takes a shape that can no longer be ignored. Seen together, these three examples form a distinct psychological progression: the self that is buried, the self that is reflected, and the self that continues independently. Pyramid Head represents the part of the psyche that has been denied but never truly disappears. He is not a sudden aberration in the present, but a heavy accumulation of everything James has avoided, repressed, or pushed away for too long. The things James cannot face directly return from the fog as an external executioner. Darklink exists in an entirely different state. He is immediate and present, a version of the self that stands directly in front of you. The conversation is not about uncovering a buried memory, but about being forced to look at a mirror that matches your velocity. The discomfort comes from the fact that the difference between the original and the copy is no longer obvious on the surface. It has to be searched for somewhere deeper than the appearance or physical execution. The SAX pushes the fracture to the absolute limit because it removes the need for conversation altogether. It is not a hidden trauma or a reflection. It represents a terror of a version of yourself continuing to move forward in the world without you. The identity has split from its origin and no longer needs the original, it simply moves on. This is where the Doppelganger moves beyond simple duplication. A copy is frightening because it resembles you, but a double is terrifying because it dismantles the assumption that identity is a fixed, contained property that always remains attached to a single body. We rarely question that assumption because everyday life constantly protects us from doing so. We wake up as the same person we were yesterday. Our memories connect seamlessly, and our choices feel like our own. The Doppelganger breaks that comfort by exposing a different vulnerability in each iteration. Pyramid Head shows that parts of ourselves we reject do not lose power simply because we refuse to acknowledge them. Darklink shows that our behavior can be reflected so accurately that familiarity itself becomes hostile. The SAX demonstrates that something built from your exact identity can function perfectly well without you. In the end, you come to the quiet realization that the boundaries of your identity were never as solid as you believed. Jean Cocteau once wrote, "The enemy is more precisely defined as that part of yourself which you don't know." That may be why the devil has remained such a persistent nightmare across centuries and cultures. It does not introduce an alien threat from the dark. It reveals a threat that was already present, utilizing your own history and wearing your own face. And so, we are left with one final question. If the counterfeit has your face, your habits, and your memories, how long until you stop being the original?